Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Let's say that a simple flight from Dubai turned into a crazy fiasco for me. There I was, stuck next to the most entitled mother and her wild child I've ever encountered. As soon as I saw them approaching my row, my heart sank. I've had my fair share of bad experiences with kids on flights, and this one was shaping up to be another disaster. At first, things seemed okay. The kid, probably around 5 or 6, was quiet as we took off, but that peace didn't last long. Before we even reached cruising altitude, he was up and running around like the plane was his personal playground. Excuse me, ma'am, could you please control your child? The mother barely looked up from her phone, giving me a dismissive wave. Oh, he's just a kid. Let him burn off some energy. I couldn't believe it. The kid was throwing toys, bumping into people, and making a general nuisance of himself. The flight attendants were trying their best to manage the situation, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. Ma'am, we need you to keep your son in his seat. It's for his safety and the comfort of other passengers. He's fine. Just ignore him if it bothers you so much. The flight attendant looked as shocked as I felt. How could someone be so oblivious to the chaos their child was causing? As the flight went on, I tried to distract myself with a movie, but it was impossible with the constant commotion. About halfway through the flight, I decided to order a Coke, hoping the caffeine might help me deal with this stress. Could I get a Coke, please? Certainly, sir. I'll bring that right over. As soon as the flight attendant handed me the drink, the kid's eyes locked onto it like a heat-seeking missile. He started whining and pointing, making grabby hands toward my Coke. I want that, mommy. I want that drink. The mother, who had been ignoring her child's behavior for hours, suddenly became very interested in what I was doing. She gave me a look that could curdle milk. He really wants your drink. Just give it to him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she seriously asking me to hand over my drink to her kid? I'm sorry, but this is my drink. Why don't you ask the flight attendant for one for him? Why should I have to do that when you already have one right there? Because it's my drink, and I don't want to share it with a stranger's child. She huffed and rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like, "Selfish jerk." I was beyond annoyed at this point, and despite her, I took my time sipping my Coke, making a show of how much I was enjoying it. I even decided to order another one. Excuse me, could I get another Coke, please? As a flight attendant approached with my second drink, the kid lunged for it, nearly knocking it out of her hand. Ma'am, please control your child. This behavior is unacceptable. The mother looked offended, as if the flight attendant had just insulted her entire family lineage. How dare you speak to me like that? He is just a child. I understand, but this behavior is disrupting other passengers and could be dangerous. Please keep him in his seat. The mother huffed and puffed, her face turning red with anger. For the rest of the flight, she kept shooting daggers at me with her eyes, as if I was personally responsible for ruining her day. As we entered the final hour of the flight, I had reached my limit. The kid was still causing problems, running up and down the aisle, and the mother was still doing nothing to stop him. And that's when an idea struck me. It was pity, I'll admit, but I was beyond caring at this point. I called the flight attendant over one more time. Could I get one more Coke, please? And could you bring it in a can this time? Of course, sir. I'll bring that right away. When she returned with the can, I waited until the mother and her demon child were distracted. Then I carefully shook the can, making sure not to be too obvious about it. I placed it on my tray table, purposely leaving it close to the aisle. Then I pretended to fall asleep, keeping one eye slightly open to watch what would happen. It didn't take long. The kid, seeing the unopened can of Coke just sitting there, couldn't resist. He crept up to my seat, his mother too engrossed in her phone to notice, and just as he reached for the can, I spoke up. I wouldn't do that if I were you, but it was too late. The kid had already grabbed the can and was trying to open it. The moment the tap cracked, a fountain of fizzy brown liquid exploded all over him. He shrieked in surprise, dropping the can and sending even more Coke splashing across the aisle. What have you done? She jumped up, finally paying attention to her child, who was now covered in sticky soda and crying loudly. I told you not to take it. It's not my fault he didn't listen. The mother was furious, her face turning an impressive shade of red. You did this on purpose. How dare you trick my son? Flight attendant asks, what's going on here? The flight attendant rushed over, taking in the scene of the sopping, soda-soaked child and the fuming mother. This man deliberately shook up a soda can to spray my son. I did no such thing. Your son took my drink without permission, even after I warned him not to. I can't be held responsible for his actions. The flight attendant looked between us, clearly trying to piece together what had happened. Ma'am, your son shouldn't have been out of his seat or taking things from other passengers. Sir, I'll need to ask you not to leave your containers unattended. That's it? He ruins my son's clothes and that's all you have to say? Ma'am, please lower your voice. We'll get your son cleaned up, but I must remind you that you're responsible for supervising him during the flight. The mother spluttered indignantly, but the flight attendant was already leading the sticky, sniffling child towards the bathroom to get cleaned up. I couldn't help but feel a little satisfied. It wasn't the most mature reaction, I'll admit, but after hours of dealing with their nonsense, it felt good to see some consequences for their actions. For the remainder of the flight, the kid stayed firmly in his seat, wrapped in an airline blanket, while his clothes dried. The mother alternated between glaring at me and fussing over her son. I put my headphones back on and enjoyed the relative peace and quiet for the last 30 minutes of our journey. When we finally landed and started to deplane, I made sure to make my time gathering my things. I had no desire to be anywhere near that woman or her child as we exited the aircraft. As I finally made my way down the aisle, I caught the eye of one of the flight attendants. She gave me a small, knowing smile and a subtle nod. I guess I wasn't the only one glad to see the back of those two. Let me back up a bit. I'm just your average guy working a 9 to 5 job at an office downtown. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bill. I've always been the type to mind my own business and avoid confrontation. Growing up in a small town, my parents taught me to work hard for what I want and never expect handouts. It's a mindset that served me well so far. So there I was, pulling into the gas station after work. It had been a long day and all I wanted was to fill up my tank and get home to relax. As I got out of my car, I noticed this beat-up minivan pull up to the pump next to me. The driver was a woman who looked like she'd seen better days. Her hair a mess and dark circles under her eyes. The back seat was crammed full of kids, all yelling and fighting with each other. I tried not to stare and went about my business, swiping my car and starting to pump gas. And that's when I heard her voice. Hey you! I looked over thinking maybe I'd dropped something. Yes? Listen, I'm in a bit of a bind here. I've got 5 kids to feed and no money for gas. How about you help a single mother out and pay for my tank? I was taken aback. Who asks a complete stranger to pay for their gas? I'm sorry, but I cannot do that. I've got my own expenses to worry about. Oh come on, don't be selfish. Look at all these hungry mouths I have to feed. She gestured to the chaos in her backseat. I felt bad for the kids, but this wasn't my responsibility. Look, I understand you're in a tough situation, but I can't just give away my money to everyone who asks. You're just a heartless jerk. Don't you care about children? Her voice was getting louder and people were starting to stare. I felt my face getting hot with embarrassment. Of course I care about children, but maybe you should think twice about having kids you can't provide for. As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. How dare you? You don't know anything about my life. Before I could react, she grabbed the gas nozzle from her pump and started spraying gasoline all over my car. I stood there in shock, unable to believe what was happening. What are you doing? Stop! But she didn't stop. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a lighter. Time seemed to slow it down as I watched her flick it open. No, don't! It was too late. She tossed the lighter onto my gas-soaked car, and suddenly everything was engulfed in flames. The heat hit me like a wall and I stumbled backward, nearly falling. People started screaming and running. The woman's kids were crying in the van, but she just stood there, a crazed look in her eyes. See what happens when you don't help people? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was this really happening because I refused to pay for her gas? The gas station staff sprang into action. Two guys came running out with fire extinguishers, trying to contain the blaze. Another was on a phone, presumably calling for help. Everyone, get back. It's not safe. We need to evacuate the area now. I watched in horror as the flames spread, threatening to reach the gas pumps. If that happened, the whole place could go up. The woman seemed to finally realize the gravity of what she'd done. Her smug expression turned into one of panic. I didn't mean to. But it was too late for apologies. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. The fire trucks arrived within minutes, and the firefighters took over, battling the blaze with professional efficiency. Clear the area. Everyone, move back. As they worked to extinguish the fire, police cars pulled up. Officers quickly assessed the situation and approached the woman who was now trying to get back into her van. Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. You don't understand. I have to go. Put your hands where I can see them. You're under arrest. As they handcuffed her, she started screaming and thrashing. This is all his fault. He wouldn't help me. She tried to point at me, but the officers weren't having it. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I stand there watching as they put her in the back of a police car. Her kids were still in the van crying and confused. Another officer approached them, speaking softly and trying to calm them down. It wasn't until the adrenaline started to wear off that I realized I was shaking. An officer came over to take my statement. Sir, can you please tell me what happened here? I took a deep breath and recounted the events, still struggling to believe it myself. Well, she asked me to pay for her gas. When I refused, she just lost it. Did you know this woman prior to this incident? No, never seen her before in my life. As I answered the officer's questions, I couldn't help but look over at what remained of my car. It was a jarred mess, completely destroyed. I felt a wave of anger and frustration wash over me. How was I going to get to work? How much would insurance cover? All because some entitled woman couldn't take no for an answer. The gas station manager approached me looking stressed but sympathetic. I'm so sorry this happened, sir. We'll provide all the security footage to the police. Is there someone we can call for you? I nodded, giving them my roommate's number. As I waited for my ride, I watched the firefighters finish up and the police taking statements from other witnesses, and social services arriving to deal with the woman's children. It was surreal. Just an hour ago, my biggest concern had been what to have for dinner. Now I was carless, shaken, and caught up in what would surely be a legal nightmare. As my roommate pulled up looking worried and confused, I tried to figure out how I was going to explain all this. How do you even begin to describe such a bizarre and terrifying experience? I tell him, you're not gonna believe what just happened. Are you okay? What's going on? Well, remember how we always joke about encountering crazy people? I think I just met the craziest of them all. The woman, as it turned out, had a history of similar incidents. She was facing serious charges, and her kids were placed in the care of CPS. As for me, I was left to pick up the pieces. My insurance covered most of the damage, but the psychological impact lingered. Every time I pulled into a gas station, I found myself scanning the area, half expecting another entitled person to demand something from me. But life goes on. I got a new car, albeit a cheaper model than my old one. I installed a dash cam just in case, and I learned to be a little more cautious about engaging with strangers, especially those who seem a bit too eager to ask for favors. I'm a 29-year-old woman, and my mother and I have had our problems. Just like many other toxic mother-daughter relationships, I left home as a teenager to escape the abusive environment our home had become. I moved in with a friend in a different state, which also didn't end well. But that's a story for another post. Despite everything, I kept communication open. She has continued to cause drama at every major event in my life, but I consider myself a pro at moving on at this point. I have planned paid time off coming up in a couple of months because my job will be closed for renovations, and she has been planning a visit during this time. Over the past few months, she's mentioned it a few times, and we've worked through the details together. Today, she emailed me to say that when she comes to visit, she will likely not have funding for anything more than gas. She plans to bring a tent for her and her husband to sleep in during the stay and has inquired about available space in my yard. Despite being fully aware that I don't own the home I live in and that I do not have the right to allow her to stay in our yard in a tent and use our facilities for any amount of time, much less several days. At first, I hoped there was some awful attempt at humor putting me in an uncomfortable position to laugh at my discomfort because it's something she's done several times in my life. Once she even pretended to have a full-blown disorder complete with vocal tics in the middle of a crowded shopping center just to laugh at my humiliation at her antics. So this seemed likely. Unfortunately, she was serious, and when I told her no, that I couldn't help her with this, she simply said, "Alright, I'll figure it out myself." As though it isn't the most irresponsible choice to drive halfway across the country as a grown adult who knows they cannot afford to do such a thing. I have no idea what will happen, but I'm expecting a "What, don't you want to see us?" response anytime, since I advised her not to make the trip at all, as she clearly cannot afford it. As a grown adult who can't afford to travel myself, I'm astounded at the audacity. Edit. Wow, I have never gotten this much of a response on any post in the past, so I'm going to answer a few questions I feel matter that I've seen in the comments. Why not cut her out completely? A. I honestly don't have a good reason, just that I'd feel guilty. I'm the only family member out of state, and I worry that cutting her out will result in the loss of family I would regret losing. I'm just afraid, I guess. Why don't you offer to put her in a hotel? I'm like a lot of people in my age group these days, struggling. I'm not even the only earner in the house, and we're still chasing the wrong end of the paycheck at the end of the day. I'd love to have been able to go back and visit myself, but it would be irresponsible to attempt a trip I can't afford. And putting my own little family at risk is not worth the moment of happiness I might find checking in on others I miss. Is it possible her living situation has changed and she doesn't plan on leaving my yard? I never even considered this, and it horrified me see it hoarded out. I would love to think she could never pull something like that, but honestly, I feel anything is possible. Thank you all for your logical advice. I really appreciate knowing that my own little circle isn't wrong to think the things I've seen here. I'm still waiting to hear how she responds to my suggestion that she not come, and I will do my best to post an end to this unfortunate story. Edit 2. Wow, okay. Apparently, this whole "I can't afford anything but gas" story was all a ruse to get to spend more time together while she visits. Allegedly, she's more than comfortable financially and has no fear that this trip will put her into financial hardship as she's making better money than ever before. Plus, she gets really good deals on rooms because she works for a popular hotel brand. I honestly don't know what to think at this point. I don't know if it'll be worse if she's lying about her financial stability to make me feel better and let my guard down about her visit, or if it's entirely legitimate and she lied about financial hardship simply to play on my emotions. Either way, I can't stop her from making the trip. All I can do is make sure I stick to my boundaries and not allow her to overstep them. Thank you all for your helpful advice and honest opinions. Hard as it may be to hear some of them, I cannot deny it all needed to be said. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.